The council chamber aboard the Coalition's flagship was vast, designed to impress and intimidate. Its vaulted ceiling shimmered with projected star fields, each point of light representing a contested world. Around the circular table sat the leaders of countless alien species, their scaled, feathered, and chitinous forms shifting with fatigue and unease. 2 centuries of war had worn them thin, drained their populations, and reduced once-proud fleets to scattered remnants. The Coalition had endured, but endurance was not victory. And every commander present knew it. At the table's far side stood General Kale. Unlike the others, he was humanoid in shape, his species bearing a resemblance to humanity's kind, though leaner and taller, with ridges along his brow that lent him an air of perpetual sternness. His uniform bore the scars of repairs, patches from battles long past, as if his very clothes mirrored his weary spirit. Kale was not a man given to sentiment. He had seen too many campaigns collapse, too many officers buried in the void. To waste words on false hope, he addressed the chamber with the same gravel-rough tone that had carried him through decades of war. The Zereth Dominion grows bolder by the day. Their fleets push deeper into our territories, striking with efficiency that outpaces our recovery. We have fought them 2 stalemates. Yes, but every stalemate bleeds us further. We cannot hold this war much longer, not at this pace. Murmurs filled the chamber. Kale let them simmer, then silenced them with a single raised hand. His eyes swept the assembly. We must admit what none here wish to say aloud. We are losing. The statement rippled like a shockwave. One insectoid delegate clicked angrily. Another feathered species hissed disapproval. Yet none dared to refute him. The maps above their heads displayed the truth in cold light territory after territory swallowed by the Dominion's crimson banners. And then, in the stillness that followed, another voice spoke. Smooth, measured, human. I believe there is an alternative. Heads turned toward the speaker, a man seated quietly near the chamber's edge, so easily overlooked that some had forgotten he was present at all. His dark suit was simple compared to the ceremonial robes of the others, his presence almost understated, yet his calm demeanor drew attention like a gravitational pull. Ambassador Idris Hale of Earth leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. Kale's jaw tightened. Ambassador. With respect, your world has remained neutral since the war began. You've had the luxury of silence while the rest of us have bled. What alternative could you possibly offer now? Hale's eyes flicked briefly to the general, then back to the gathered council. Your war has stretched for 2 centuries because you all wage it as though time is infinite. It is not. Time is the most decisive weapon of all. Humanity understands this. When we fight, we do not linger in drawn-out attrition. We finish. The insectoid delegate clattered its mandibles in derision, empty words. Your species has no fleets worthy of mention. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. You lack soldiers hardened by centuries of war. Admiral Roven, seated opposite Kale, allowed himself a cruel smile. The Zereth commander was only present as a representative in negotiations. A rare courtesy allowed to mock his enemies directly. His long, angular face bore the sleek markings of his people's warrior caste, his armor polished until it gleamed. When he spoke, his voice cut like a blade. The human flatters himself. His people are children among civilizations. The Dominion has crushed empires far older and greater than Earth. To imagine that they, of all races, might alter the course of this war is absurd. Hale's expression did not falter. You think wars are won by age, by tradition. No. Wars are won by ending them, swiftly and absolutely. That is humanity's way. Kale's hand struck the table, silencing the exchange. Enough. This is no place for riddles. If you have something of substance to offer, Ambassador, speak it plainly. Hale inclined his head in acknowledgement. His voice remained even, steady, almost unnervingly assured. When humans fight, we do not settle for balance. We do not prepare for campaigns of decades. We wage war to end it. Hours, not centuries. That is the difference. The chamber erupted. Laughter, outrage, disbelief. The very idea was an insult to species who had sacrificed generations. Rovin's laughter was sharp, cruel, carrying across the chamber like a predator's growl. Ours, he sneered. A war that has consumed a galaxy for 200 years, ended in ours. You expose yourself as a fool, Ambassador. Humanity may have courage, but courage is not enough to conquer the Dominion. Hale simply looked at him, calm as stone. Perhaps. Or perhaps you will discover that humanity has no need for centuries of grinding stalemate. Perhaps what takes you lifetimes, we require only a fraction of a day. For a long moment, silence fell, broken only by the soft hum of the projectors above. Cale studied Hale with narrowed eyes. He wanted to dismiss the man, to label him arrogant or naive. Yet there was something in Hale's voice, some weight that refused to be ignored. Cale had fought long enough to recognize when an enemy underestimated a threat. And if the human was right, if his people truly possessed such a doctrine of war, it could change everything. Still, Cale's voice was harsh. Words cost nothing, Ambassador. If humanity can end this war, then why have you remained absent until now? Hale's gaze did not waver. Because timing is everything, General. Intervention too early serves only to prolong. Intervention too late serves no one. We waited until the moment mattered most. That moment is now. The chamber stirred again, whispers flowing like currents. Cale felt unease coil in his gut. Was this man bluffing, or had Earth's hidden depths none had imagined? Admiral Rovin rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, meant to display his towering height. He looked down at Hale with contempt etched across every feature. Your kind will burn like all the others. If you choose to join the coalition, then humanity will meet the same fate. We will grind your species into dust, and the war will remain ours to decide. Hale met his gaze without flinching. His voice, though soft, carried through the chamber with finality. No, Admiral. If humanity joins, this war will end before you comprehend it has begun. The tension hung like a storm about to break. Cale exhaled slowly, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of his peers searching for his decision, for any sign of where the coalition might stand. He wanted to dismiss Hale as delusional, wanted to cling to the bitter familiarity of a war they all understood. At something in the human's words gnawed at him, like the faint tremor before an earthquake. The meeting dissolved soon after. Delegates murmuring among themselves, some laughing, others whispering uneasily. Rovin left with a sneer, satisfied that humanity was nothing more than a boastful distraction. Cale lingered. He found himself standing beside Hale as the chamber emptied, the hum of the projectors dimming. He spoke low, for no ears but the humans. If you're lying, Ambassador, your people will be destroyed. You understand that? Hale gave a faint smile, one that did not quite reach his eyes. General, humanity has lived with destruction since the moment we learned to wield fire. We do not fear it. We master it. Cale studied him a long moment, then turned away. He had wars to fight, battles to lose, fleets to sacrifice. The humans? Words might have been nothing more than bravado, and yet, deep in the marrow of his bones, Cale could not shake the unease that when humanity finally stepped onto the battlefield, everything would change as the great doors sealed shut behind. Hal stood alone in the dimmed chamber. He looked up at the projected stars, at the crimson tide of Zareth, control spreading like a plague across the galaxy. He exhaled softly, as though the sight was of no consequence. 5 hours, he murmured, almost to himself. That's all it will take. And then he left the chamber, his steps unhurried, as if time itself already bent to his words. The stars above Vero's prime burned cold and distant, indifferent to the vast fleets gathered below. The coalition had chosen this world not because of sentiment, but because it was strategic. Its orbital shipyards, though battered, still produced enough supplies to feed armies. Its position, straddling key trade routes, made it a prize that neither side could ignore. And so, like moths to flame, the Zereth Dominion and the coalition converged upon it. For what many believed might be the war's decisive clash, General Kale stood on the bridge of the coalition flagship, the Resolute, watching the fleet form into ragged battle lines. Squadrons of battered cruisers and scarred carriers maneuvered into place, their hulls bearing the wounds of too many engagements. The crews were veterans, disciplined and hardened, but there was no disguising the exhaustion that ran through every vessel. Kale felt it in his own bones, that weight of centuries pressing heavier with every campaign. Reports streamed across the holotables, Dominion fleets approaching in overwhelming numbers. Their formations flawless, their discipline absolute. Kale's officers worked in strained silence, each man knowing that today might be their last. There was no false optimism left, only grim resolve. Kale's second-in-command, Commander Vaynor, approached, his face pale beneath the bridge lights. "Sir, scouts report the Dominion advance will arrive within the hour. They outnumber us 3-1. Kale gave a small nod, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. As expected, he paused, then added quietly, "We will fight regardless." Before Vaynor could reply, the comms officer spoke sharply. Incoming signal unidentified fleet emerging at the system's edge. Configuration unknown. The words drew the attention of the entire bridge. Kale's brows furrowed as he turned to the display. A new set of signals appeared, faint at first, then multiplying as more ships broke through the void. Their silhouettes were unlike anything Kale had seen before. Sleek, angular designs that seemed smaller than traditional warships, yet radiating an aura of precision and menace. The comms officer hesitated, transmitting identification codes now. "Sir, they claim to be human vessels." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then incredulous laughter erupted from one of the junior officers. Kale silenced him with a glare. "Patch them through." Main screen flickered, and the face of Ambassador Idris Hale appeared. No grand podium, no council chamber jest, Hale standing aboard one of the strange ships. Calm as ever, the stars stretching behind him. "General Kale," Hale said evenly, "we've come to fulfill our promise." Kale's throat tightened. He wanted to demand explanations, to curse the man for his arrogance, but all he could manage was a terse, "You brought that a handful of ships." Hale's lips curved faintly, as though Kale had said something amusing. "It will be enough." Kale's jaw clenched. "The Dominion outnumbers us 3-1. If you intend to die gloriously, you will achieve it, but do not imagine it will turn the tide." Hale's voice did not rise. "Watch, General. Learn what it means when humans wage war." Without waiting for a reply, the transmission ended. Kale's fists tightened at his sides. He wanted to scoff, wanted to dismiss the human as a madman. But deep down, a thread of unease tugged at him, the same unease Hale had stirred in the council chamber. Moments later, the Dominion fleet arrived in full force. Vast formations of Zereth warships spilled into the system, their hulls gleaming like blades under starlight. At their center loomed the flagship of Admiral Rovan, an immense battleship bristling with weaponry. Rovan himself stood upon its bridge, watching as the battlefield unfolded before him. When he saw the human ships, his laughter was sharp and cruel. So, the children joined the slaughter at last. Pathetic. I will crush them first, so all may see how frail humanity truly is. Orders rippled through the Dominion fleet, and squadrons surged forward. Kale braced for impact, barking commands to tighten coalition lines. But then, the unexpected happened. The human ships moved. They did not advance in cautious formations, nor did they exchange long-range fire like other fleets. Instead, they darted forward with impossible speed, weaving through enemy ranks like predators among prey. From their hulls erupted bursts of kinetic fire projectiles accelerated at velocities that shredded Dominion shields as though they were paper. Each strike landed with surgical precision, tearing through engines, reactors, command centers. Dominion cruisers that had endured decades of war crumpled in moments, their carcasses drifting lifeless into the void. Kale's officers stared in disbelief. One whispered, "Their weapons. They're tearing through the Dominion shields. No one's ever done that." It was true. The Coalition had spent generations trying to break through Zereth shielding technology, throwing countless lives into battles of attrition. Yet the humans dismantled it with cold efficiency, bypassing defenses as though they were irrelevant. The Dominion reeled. Admiral Rovan barked orders, directing his fleet to concentrate fire on the newcomers. Swarms of plasma fire lanced across the void, yet the human ships seemed to anticipate every volley, shifting trajectories with unnerving foresight. Then came the second strike. Human ships unleashed waves of electromagnetic pulses and directed cyber intrusions, invisible weapons that ripped through Dominion command networks. Kale watched as entire squadrons suddenly veered off course, their systems hijacked, their weapons silenced. Some ships fired upon their allies, others shut down entirely, drifting powerless in the void. Within the first 30 minutes, over a quarter of Rovan's fleet was neutralized. Kale gripped the edge of the holotable, his heart pounding. He had seen battles last months, seen campaigns grind endlessly without result. Yet here, before his eyes, a fleet that had mocked humanity's insignificance was crumbling. On the Dominion, flagship Rovan roared with fury. Impossible. No species could have concealed such power. His officers scrambled in panic, trying to restore order, but the chaos only grew. Every countermeasure he devised was met by human adaptation, faster. Then thought, as though their machines were already inside his. Kale turned to Vaynor, his voice low. "Do you see it now? They're not just fighting differently. They're fighting as though the concept of time itself bends to them." Hours bled into minutes. Human ships struck and vanished, reappearing where defenses were weakest. Railgun salvos ripped through command vessels, tearing them apart in single blows. The Dominion, once feared for its discipline, flailed like a wounded beast. Finally, after 2 hours, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Wreckage littered the void. Fires burned across crippled ships. Coalition vessels had scarcely fired a fraction of their arsenal. Yet already the tide had turned irrevocably. Hale's face returned to Kale's screen. His voice was calm, almost casual, as though he spoke not of slaughter, but of inevitability. 2 hours gone. 3 remain. Kale stared at him, words caught in his throat. All his years of war, all the suffering of his people, and this human spoke as though it were a simple equation. He wanted to hate the man, but all began to creep in, unbidden and unstoppable. Across the system, Rovan's voice thundered in defiance, transmitted to all fleets. "Fight on. Do not yield to these tricksters. The Dominion endures." But his words rang hollow, drowned beneath the silent, methodical storm of human warfare. Kale exhaled slowly, realization sinking like a stone in his chest. Humanity had not exaggerated. They had not lied. They had simply waited. And now, with terrifying clarity, they were showing the galaxy how wars ended, as Hale's image faded. Kale looked upon the void where fleets clashed and whispered to himself, "What manner of species ends centuries in hours?" The question lingered in the silence, demanding an answer only the next battle could provide. Admiral Rovin's command chamber was thick with the acrid stench of overheated systems. Smoke curled from shattered consoles, sparks spat from ruptured wiring. On the once pristine floor bore the charred streaks of emergency repairs. Officers scrambled between stations, their discipline cracking beneath the relentless assault. Rovin stood tall among the chaos, his posture rigid, his eyes burning with fury as he stared at the tactical display. The battle had become a slaughter. What should have been the Dominion's triumph was collapsing into ruin. Entire squadrons had been erased in minutes, their wrecks scattered across the void. Human ships, fewer in number and seemingly fragile, had dismantled his armada with a precision that defied comprehension. Every maneuver he ordered, every countermeasure he devised, was anticipated and exploited. It was as though his enemy could read his thoughts before he voiced them. One of his lieutenants stumbled forward, his voice trembling. "Admiral, we must fall back to the second defensive line. Our losses are..." Rovin struck him across the jaw with the back of his gauntlet hand. The officer reeled, blood trailing from his mouth, but Rovin's voice drowned out his pain. "We do not retreat. We are the Dominion. We endure." The words rang hollow even to him. He could feel the weight pressing on his chest, the dreadful realization gnawing at the edges of his mind. Humanity had been dismissed as irrelevant, a primitive curiosity. Yet they were dismantling to centuries of supremacy in mere hours. On the bridge of the Resolute, General Kale watched in stunned silence. The Dominion fleet was fracturing, its cohesion evaporating. Entire sectors of the battlefield lay strewn with wreckage, and the human scale almost could not bring himself to call them allies, moved like predators among prey. Each strike calculated, each maneuver devastating. Commander Vayner spoke in a hushed tone, as though afraid to break the spell. "General, they fight as though this war was never a contest." Kale said nothing. His mind was caught between awe and dread. In all his years of command, he had never seen an enemy undone so swiftly. Wars in this galaxy were drawn-out contests of attrition, of sieges and counter-sieges, campaigns spanning decades. Yet the humans treated war as a single act, not a drawn-out play. A swift, merciless act. His gaze drifted to the holofeed, where Ambassador Hale's face occasionally appeared, delivering brief updates with the same calm certainty as though he were narrating a rehearsal long prepared. Hale's demeanor unsettled him more than the violence of the battle. It was not arrogance, nor bravado, it was inevitability. Kale found himself whispering, almost against his will, "How do you end centuries in hours?" The question had no answer. Not yet. As the third hour began, the Dominion's outer defenses shattered, human warships did not pursue with reckless fervor. They advanced methodically, striking at supply lines, severing communication relays, collapsing the intricate web upon which Dominion strength relied. Planetary garrisons that once expected decades of resistance now fell silent as their defensive grids were hijacked. Their orbital platforms turned against them. Reports flooded in from across the system. Dominion commanders abandoned posts, their ships scattering in disarray. Some surrendered outright, their crews too terrified to face a foe that seemed unstoppable. Kale's officers, long inured to despair, now stared at their consoles in disbelief. They were witnessing not simply victory, but the dismantling of an empire's pride. On the Dominion flagship, Rovin's fury reached its breaking point. His fists pounded the console, each impact leaving fresh dents in the metal. "This cannot be." They are but one world, one insignificant race. How can they wield such power? His chief strategist, pale with fear, dared to speak. Admiral, perhaps? They have been hiding this strength, waiting for a decisive strike. Perhaps this was their plan all along. Rovan rounded on him, eyes ablaze. Then they are more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced. And if that is so, then we cannot afford mercy. His voice lowered to a growl. Transmit my command. To all units, scorched void protocols. If we cannot hold this system, we will burn it until nothing remains. Even as his officers scrambled to obey, the human fleet moved faster. Their communications interference spread like wildfire, silencing Dominion channels before the order could reach half the fleet. Rovan's grand decree dissolved into static. His command structure was unraveling before his eyes. Back on the Resolute, Kale finally broke his silence. They're not just attacking ships. They're dismantling an empire, piece by piece. His voice carried a strange mix of admiration and dread. Vaynor looked at him sharply. General, do you think they mean to end the Dominion or to replace it? The question hung heavy in the air. Kale had no answer. Humanity had remained hidden for centuries, biding their time, emerging only when the war was at its most fragile. Now they were sweeping across the battlefield like a storm that had always been waiting. The comms crackled again. Hale's face filled the screen as calm and measured as ever. 3 hours gone. 2 remain. Kale's throat tightened. The man spoke of time as though it were a ledger, as though every hour was a calculated step in an equation only he understood. He found his voice. Ambassador, what are you? What kind of people fight like this? Hale regarded him steadily. The kind who do not waste time. The kind who learned long ago that drawn-out wars consume not just armies, but civilizations. On Earth, no. War lasted centuries. None could. Resources, terrain, politics, survival, they all demanded that war end swiftly. We adapted, we evolved. We perfected the art of ending what others prolong. His gaze was unwavering. And now, we end this. Kale felt the words settle into him like a weight. He realized then that humanity's strength was not merely in their weapons or technology, but in their philosophy of survival. They did not fight to endure. They fought to finish. Meanwhile, Rovan's forces crumbled further. Reports of surrenders reached him with increasing frequency, each one a knife to his pride. He raged, he threatened, he executed officers for cowardice, but it was as though his fury had lost its power. The Dominion had ruled for centuries on fear and discipline. Humanity had stripped both away in a matter of hours. By the 4th hour, coalition fleets scarcely needed to fire. The humans had broken the Dominion's back. Kale stood at the viewing ports of the Resolute, watching as the last organized squadrons scattered into the void. He turned to Vaynor and spoke softly. We have fought for centuries to survive, and yet they fight for hours to win. Tell me which of us truly understands war. The words lingered, unanswered. As the 4th hour ended, Rovan gathered the remnants of his command. His flagship was battered, its shields flickering, its weapons failing, but his pride refused surrender. He stared into the void with eyes that burned, vowing to make a final stand. If humanity thinks to break us in hours, let them try. The Dominion has endured the test of centuries. I will not bow. Yet even as he spoke, reports arrived, human fleets moving toward the Dominion homeworld, their trajectory unmistakable. They were not content with victory here. They intended annihilation. Rovan's hand clenched into a fist, his voice low, venomous. Then let the galaxy witness. If I am to fall, I will fall defiant. On the Resolute, Kale received word of the human advance. The realization struck him with brutal clarity. Humanity had no intention of merely repelling the Dominion. They were driving straight for its heart, aiming to end the war in a single day. He turned once more to Hale's image on the screen. The human's calm expression had not changed, but there was something in his eyes, now something cold, merciless. Hale understood, with a chill that settled deep into his bones, that the Dominion was not simply being defeated. It was being erased. And so, as the 5th hour approached, Hale whispered to himself, "The galaxy will never be the same." The thought was not comfort. It was warning. The Dominion homeworld filled the void ahead, a vast sphere of shadowed continents and glowing cities encircled by layers of defensive platforms. For centuries, it had stood as the seat of unchallenged power, its orbit bristling with fortresses, its skies thick with fleets. To strike at it directly had always been unthinkable, the dream of desperate fools. Yet now, in the 5th hour of humanity's war, the impossible was already becoming inevitable. Admiral Rovan stood on the bridge of his battered flagship, his face drawn and hollow beneath the pale lights. His once proud fleet had been reduced. 2 fragments, his officers gaunt with fear. He refused to show weakness, though his hands trembled as they clutched the rail before him. "This is our hour of defiance," he told them, his voice harsh. "The humans will learn that the Dominion does not bow." "We are eternal," no one answered. They knew as well as he did that eternity was already breaking apart in the void. Reports of surrenders flooded in, world after world choosing submission rather than annihilation. Yet Rovan would not bend. If the Dominion was to fall, he would ensure it fell with fire. Across the system, the human fleet advanced. Sleek vessels cut through the void, their hulls gleaming with cold starlight. They moved with perfect cohesion, each strike prepared before the enemy even reacted. Coalition ships followed at a distance, watching with a mixture of awe and unease. Uncertain whether they were witnessing salvation or something far more terrifying. On the Resolute, General Hale stood with arms folded, his gaze fixed on the sight of the human armada pressing toward the Dominion's heart. His voice was low, almost reverent. "I have fought my entire life believing war was endurance, that we could outlast them if only we bled long enough. But this is something else." Ambassador Hale appeared on the screen once more. His face remained composed, but there was no trace of satisfaction in his expression. It was as though he were merely a conductor guiding an orchestra through a familiar score. "General, do not mistake this for cruelty. It is necessity. A war prolonged is a war that devours all. We will not allow that." Hale's reply was quiet, almost troubled. "And when it ends, Ambassador? When the Dominion is ash and surrender, what then? Who holds such power afterward?" Hale's eyes held his without wavering. "We do not seek empires, only conclusions." Before Hale could respond, alarms rippled across the bridge. Dominion ships surged from the homeworld's orbit, Rovan at their head, his flagship leading what remained of his forces. It was not a fleet, was a final scream of defiance. Rovan's voice thundered across every channel, carried on waves of static. "Human interlopers, you think yourselves gods because you shattered fleets already weakened by centuries of war. You are nothing but scavengers, and I will see your corpses burned upon the altar of our homeworld." The human response was silence. Their ships did not rise to the insult. They simply advanced, weapons charging, calculations already unfolding. Rovan's fleet met them in a storm of fire. Plasma cannons erupted, missile salvos streaked across the void, every weapon the Dominion still possessed hurled in desperation. For a moment, the space between stars blazed with violent light, as though the very heavens burned. But when the brilliance faded, the humans were still there. Moving through the chaos with surgical precision, Railgun fire lanced out, kinetic rounds tearing through cruisers like parchment. Directed energy beams swept across the battlefield, severing weapons platforms in single strokes. Viruses slipped into Dominion networks, shutting down entire ships mid-flight. Rovan screamed orders, but half his commands never reached their targets, drowned in electronic silence. On the Resolute, Kale gripped the railing, his heart pounding as he watched the impossible become routine. Human ships moved like predators, dancing through a herd, every strike decisive, every maneuver flawless. He could almost pity the Dominion but his attention kept drifting to Hale, whose calm narration of the unfolding slaughter was delivered with the detachment of a historian describing events already recorded. Kale finally turned to him. Unable to hold back, Ambassador, do your people feel nothing? Do you not see the cost of what you're doing? For the first time, Hale's voice softened, though his eyes remained unwavering. General, every war in our history left scars. Every hour lost meant more lives destroyed, more generations consumed. So we learned not to waste hours. What you see is not apathy. It is the weight of memory. We fight quickly because we know. The agony of fighting slowly. Kale said nothing. He had no words to counter the truth in Hale's tone. Back in the Dominion fleet, Rovan's desperation boiled into rage. His flagship plowed forward, shields failing, weapons overloading, yet still he pressed the attack. He broadcast across all channels, his voice raw and jagged. Come for me, humans. If you would end this war, then face me yourself. The human fleet answered, not with speeches, but with action. Their ships converged on Rovan's flagship, isolating it, cutting away its escorts in rapid succession. One by one, Dominion cruisers erupted in blossoms of flame, until only the flagship remained. Limping through the void, Rovan stood at the heart of his dying vessel, his officers fleeing around him, fires consuming the command deck. He refused to abandon his post, his pride a wall higher than fear. He snarled into the comms, his voice hoarse. I am the Dominion. You cannot erase me. Hale's voice came across the channel, quiet yet carrying an unshakable authority. You are already erased, Admiral. You just have not yet fallen. With those words, the human fleet unleashed its final strike. Kinetic rounds tore through the flagship's hull, carving it open like a carcass. Explosions rippled across its surface, tearing away decks, spilling fire into the void. At last, the great vessel split in two, its remains drifting lifelessly toward the planet it could no longer protect. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. Across the system, Dominion signals went dark, surrender transmissions flooding. In entire garrisons laid down arms, their courage broken with their leader's fall. The war that had consumed 2 centuries ended not with a drawn-out campaign, but with a single day's ruthless conclusion. On the Resolute, Kale stood motionless, his chest tight with a mix of awe and dread. Around him, officers cheered, some wept, others simply stared in disbelief. Yet Kale could not celebrate. He turned to Hale's image, his voice low. It's over. Then, Hale gave a small nod. 5 hours. No more were needed. Kale swallowed hard. And now? What becomes of us, of all of us, after this? Hale's expression softened, though his eyes held that same weight of inevitability. Now you rebuild. You learn what it means to live without war. Humanity does not seek dominion. We seek only to end what threatens all. Kale studied him for a long moment, then allowed himself a weary exhale. For the first time in his life, he felt the crushing burden of centuries lift, replaced not with peace, but with uncertainty. The human fleet began to withdraw, their work complete. They left behind silence, The silence of a war ended too swiftly for history to grasp. As their ships vanished into the void, Kale knew one truth would echo across the galaxy forever. When humans finally joined the war, they had ended it in just 5 hours. But even as relief spread through the coalition ranks, Kale's gaze lingered on the empty stars where the humans had gone. His voice was a whisper, unheard by any but himself. What happens when they decide 5 hours is all it takes for us? The thought chilled him more than any war ever had.